The honey in your cupboard right now, there's roughly a coin flip chance it isn't fully honey, not watered down a little. Cut with rice syrup, wheat syrup, sugar beet syrup, engineered so precisely that it passes professional lab tests. European investigators sampled honey at their borders and 46% came back suspicious. And here's the part that's going to sting. Every one of those viral how to test your honey at home tricks you've seen, the water glass, the thumb, the flame, is useless. I'll show you exactly why and what actually catches the fraud in a minute. Because this is a genuinely fascinating scandal, a real crime story hiding inside a jar of something we think of as pure and simple. And it's one where almost everyone, including the people trying to protect themselves, gets it wrong. So let me untangle it, how big the fraud actually is, why your kitchen tests can't catch it, and what actually can. Start with the scale, because it's bigger than some cheap honey is watered down. In 2021 and 2022, the European Commission ran a coordinated operation called From the Hives. They collected 320 shipments of honey imported into the EU and sent them to the Commission's own Joint Research Center for analysis. The result, 147 of them, 46% were flagged as suspicious of being adulterated, meaning they likely violated the EU's legal definition of honey. Now, I want to be precise because precision is the whole point of this channel. Suspicious is not the same as convicted. Of the operators investigated, a smaller number were formally pursued and only a handful sanctioned. And part of that 46% are up from just 14% in an earlier round reflects that the testing got better. Not only that the fraud got worse. So the honest headline isn't half your honey is definitely fake. It's when Europe's best laboratory looked hard, nearly half the imported honey raised a red flag. That's still staggering. And here's what makes it a real crime story rather than a quality problem. The anti-fraud investigators, Olaf, didn't just find sugar syrup added to honey. They found something far more deliberate. Exporters and importers were working together to blend honey with rice and sugar syrups, and then running their blends through accredited laboratories in advance, specifically to fine-tune the recipe so it would slip past the official detection methods. They masked the true country of origin by forging paperwork. Some even removed the pollen, because pollen is how you trace where honey actually comes from. This isn't a farmer cutting corners. This is engineered fraud, designed by people who understand the tests better than the regulators do, which brings us to you standing in your kitchen, holding a jar and a phone full of videos telling you how to check it. And this is where I have to be the bearer of bad news, because these tests are everywhere and they do not work. Test 1. The water glass. Drop a spoonful into cold water, real honey sinks and holds together, fake honey dissolves. Here's why it fails. What sinks or disperses is controlled by viscosity and moisture, and those vary enormously between perfectly genuine honeys. A high-moisture wildflower honey and a thick-set honey behave completely differently, and both are real. And crucially, sugar syrup blended into honey is fully dissolved into it. There's nothing to separate out. There's no fake part sitting there waiting to disperse. Test 2, the thumb test. A drop on your thumb. If it stays put, it's pure. If it spreads, it's fake. Same problem. That's moisture and viscosity again, which change with temperature, with the flower source, and with whether the honey has started to crystallize. A slow crystallizing acacia. Honey stays runny for months. It's completely real. Test 3, the flame test. Dip a matchstick. If it lights, the honey is pure. This one is both dangerous and backwards. What you're actually measuring is surface moisture. A genuine wild honey harvested in a humid season can carry 22% water and fail to light, while a dehydrated factory syrup with zero real honey in it will light perfectly. The test doesn't just fail, it can actively point you at the wrong jar. Do you see the pattern? Every one of these home tests measures a physical property, thickness, moisture, density that varies naturally among real honeys and can be trivially faked in a lab. Remember, the fraud in those European cases was engineered to beat professional isotope testing. A matchstick in your kitchen was never going to stand a chance. So what actually works? At the laboratory level, real detection means going molecular. The main tools are stable isotope ratio analysis, which can spot the chemical signature of sugars from corn or sugarcane that don't belong in honey, and nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, which reads the honey's full molecular fingerprint and compares it against databases of authentic samples. These are real, powerful methods, but note two things. First, they need a lab, trained analysts, and reference databases. Nothing about them is reproducible on your countertop. And second, even these are in an arms race. The most sophisticated fraudsters have produced syrups designed to slip past them, which is exactly why the EU had to develop newer, more sensitive methods for that second round of testing. So if you can't test it at home, what do you actually do? Here's the honest, practical answer. And it's not a gadget, it's a strategy. Move your trust from the test to the source. Buy from a local beekeeper, a farmer's market, a regional beekeeping association, someone with a face and a reputation in your community who isn't going to blend syrup into a jar they'll sell to a neighbor they see every week. If you're buying at the grocery store, read the label like an investigator. Skip anything that says honey blend or lists added glucose or corn syrup. Be suspicious of imported honey with no clear producer address, since the fraud is overwhelmingly in certain import streams, and use price as a signal. Real honey is labor-intensive and expensive to produce, so when a jar is suspiciously cheap, someone somewhere has cut it with something. Let me be specific about that label advice because there's an important detail most people miss. For years, the biggest legal loophole in honey labeling was a single clause that let producers write blend of EU and non-EU honeys on the jar and stop there. No countries, no percentages, just a category that covered everything from pristine Polish apiaries to the exact import streams Olaf was investigating. You had no way to distinguish them. That is actually changing. The EU's revised honey directive, adopted in 2024, now requires that origin countries be listed individually and by proportion, so it would read something like 40% Hungary, 35% Ukraine, 25% Argentina, instead of the old catch-all. That's a meaningful reform. But changing is not changed. Member states have a transition period to implement it, so you'll still see the old labeling in shops for some time. When you do, treat it as the red flag it was designed to be. Now, the question I know you're sitting with, if nearly half the imported honey raised a red flag in a major EU investigation, why haven't you heard about mass prosecutions? Here's the honest answer. Because EU-level detection and national-level enforcement are completely separate systems. Olaf and the Joint Research Center can identify suspicious shipments and publish findings. But actual sanctions, fines, prosecutions, recalls go through national authorities in each member state. Of the 44 operators formally investigated following from the hives, 7 were sanctioned. 7. Not because the evidence was weak, because enforcement requires political will, judicial capacity, and cross-border coordination that 27 separate national systems don't automatically produce. The fraud is documented. The accountability gap is where it lives. And the one reassurance I'll give you, because it matters and because I won't overstate a risk. This particular fraud is about your wallet, not your health. Adulterating honey with sugar syrup is economic deception. You're paying honey prices for cheap syrup. But the regulators are clear that it isn't a poisoning scandal. You're being robbed, not harmed. That's a real distinction, and it's exactly the kind that gets lost when a story goes viral. So here's where we land. The fraud is real and bigger than most people think, engineered, international, and good enough to beat the professionals. The home tests are worthless because they measure the wrong thing. And your best defense isn't a trick with a glass of water. It's knowing where your honey comes from and reading what's actually on the label. That's the difference between feeling protected and being protected. This channel exists to take the scary, viral version of a story and tell you what the evidence actually says, what's real, what's myth, and what to do about it. If that's useful to you, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.